Hello there, how are you doing? Now in this video we're going to learn about a very important concept to fully understand JavaScript from the root. Okay, so it's more of a theory. Okay, now it's time for us to understand that there are two types of values in JavaScript. Whenever we're working with functions, objects, variables, anything, there are two different types of values. One is primitive and another is reference. Okay, so primitive, we already learned about primitive values earlier. They are undefined, null, boolean, number, and string. Okay, they are the primitive types. So let's go from here. In JavaScript, variable is just a name for a particular value at a particular time, which can change over time, which we already know, right? We declare a variable, let's say variable name is something, and then later we assign name to something else. You saw that many times, so that's fine with you, right? Okay, so JavaScript variable may contain two different types of data. Okay, this is important. When a value is assigned to a variable, JavaScript engine must determine if it is a primitive or reference value. Okay, so these things are behind the scenes, and most of the tutorials don't go through these steps, and so as a result you always feel like you don't really understand from the deep. So this lecture is for you if you want to understand it from the deep. Okay, so what is the difference between primitive and reference values? So these are the primitive values: undefined, null, boolean, number, and string. And reference values are objects stored in memory. So you will be manipulating the actual value stored in the variable. So when you're working with the primitive values, you're working with the actual value stored in the variable. However, when you're working on reference values, you will be manipulating the reference to the object, not the actual object itself. Let's go through these and then I'll show you by example. Okay, you can you cannot add properties to primitive values. For these values, undefined, null, number, string, you cannot add primitive values. Okay, but with objects you can add, change, or delete properties and methods to the reference values, and I think we did this before as well. Next, value stored in the variable object is copied, not referenced. Like these ones, they are referenced, but these primitive values, they are copied from one variable to another variable. However, the reference values stored in the variable object is copied into the location for new variable, but the value is actually a pointer to an object stored in the memory stack. So behaves in a similar way, however, it is pointing to the object stored in the memory. Okay, so it happens behind the scene, but it's just good to know that. So once the operation is complete, two variables points to the exact same object. Okay, so changes are reflected to one another. All right, so that's pretty much it about primitive and reference values. The only thing you need to understand here is it's pretty straightforward to understand. Undefined, null, boolean, number, and string, these are the primitive values. Okay, and then the reference values are object stored in the memory. So object, we can add, delete properties, add methods, blah blah blah, a lot of things, but they're only the pointer. If it doesn't make perfect sense, don't worry. When we doing it in real life, when we actually working on these ones, it will make perfect sense. Just understand there are two types: primitive and reference. Okay, reference is the object, primitive is all those. All right, so here's an example. Variable name, this is a primitive value. All right, variable name equals to Ryan. Now if, like we just learned, you cannot add properties to primitive. So what if we try to add? Declare variable Ryan and the name dot age. This way of writing, it works with objects, we did before as well. If it was an object, variable name equals to, if it was an object, then I could add name dot age, and object is a reference type. However, because this is a string and string is a primitive type, you can't do that. If you do that, you don't get any error, but just you don't see anything. Only reference values can have properties defined dynamically for later use. So if you do alert name.age, you will see undefined. So you can give it a try on your own. Okay, so about reference values, variable person is a new object. So if we create object like this is a string, but if we create object like this, I can add this object, so person dot name, add, and then if you alert, it works. But this one didn't work because it's primitive. This is a reference. Okay, it's reference. So copying values. This one didn't. This one copied the value, right? This one copied completely different value. However, this on the object variable object is a new object, variable object 2 equals to object 1. So I create another variable and its value is gave to this variable, which is a new object. So both of them point to the same object. Object 1.name I give Ryan. Now if I try to access object 2.name, it also gives me the same result. See? So this is how you can create one object and extend its functionality later. So this is extremely powerful concept, and you will learn more about it, okay, later on. Okay. So the explanation here: object 1 is filled with new object instance. Value is then copied to object 2. Okay. Now both variables are pointing to the same object. Yeah, same object. When property name is set on object 1, so when I set the property, before it was empty, and then later I decided, okay, I want to add Ryan. So in that case, what happened is it can be accessed from object 2 as well, because both point a reference to the same object. So that's the difference, primitive and reference. All right. So this is all I want you to know from this theoretical video, and maybe you can give it a try. Just create a string, try to add the property, doesn't work. But if you create an object and try to add property, it works. So this is it. I'll see you in the very next video. Thank you guys.